Here's a quote from Judge Gaston. Children are not safer because registered sex offenders are prohibited from residing near schools, parks, daycare centers, and other places where children tend to gather. And in fact, Judge Gaston continued, let's go to the next one. Judge Gaston continued, the conclusions and recommendations are that, difficult as it might be, so at least Judge Gaston recognizes this is pretty wingnut, the conclusion, laws that regulate where sex offenders may not live should be repealed or substantially modified in the interest of public safety. So I want you to understand the Joe Biden White House is saying a radical who wants sex offenders, who wants pedophiles to be able to live next door to daycares. That's who should be a federal judge.
Okay, did you just see that? I have watched a lot of Senate hearings, and I cannot remember the last time someone laid it out that clearly, with that many receipts in hand. That was Senator Ted Cruz on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And whether you like the man or not, what he just said deserves a serious conversation. Because this isn't really about left versus right. This is about basic standards. We are talking about someone nominated to be a federal judge. A person who will have real power over your rights and your freedom. And she could not say what Article 2 of the Constitution is. Not some buried clause nobody knows. The part that creates the entire executive branch. That is day 1, week 1 material. And that is just the first nominee. There is more. Another nominee who has never heard of Brady versus Maryland. And a third with some genuinely alarming views on where sex offenders should be allowed to live near children. We are watching the full video right now, and I am coming back with everything I think about it. If this kind of content matters to you, hit subscribe and ring the bell. This is exactly what we cover here. Let's watch.
We have 2 or 3 nominations. Charnel B.L. Kindgren, nominated to the Eastern District of Washington. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her nomination? Senator Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to welcome our colleague, Senator Feinstein, back to this committee. But I will say what's going to happen next, I think, is going to be quite unfortunate for the American people. Because what we're about to see this committee do is vote on several nominees who are so extreme, who are so unqualified, that they could not have a prayer of getting even a single Republican vote on this committee. And as everyone knows, Senator Graham votes for most of Biden's nominees. It is unusual that Senator Graham does not give a Republican vote to a Biden nominee. But there's a small subset of these nominees that are so beyond the pale that they have no prayer of getting a Republican nominee. And frankly, if my Democrat colleagues valued the responsibility of the Senate's advise and consent, my Democrat colleagues would tell the White House these nominees are unacceptable. This first nominee, Charnel Beckelgren, is so amazingly unqualified, she may well have the title for the least qualified nominee I've seen in 11 years serving on this committee. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 5 of the Constitution was, she had no idea. When Senator Kennedy asked her what Article 2 of the Constitution was, she said, I don't know. Mind you, Article 2 is the provision of the Constitution that creates the president and the executive branch of the government. Any first-year law student that didn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution was would flunk con law. This is not some obscure question about some Latin phrase no one should know. This is literally the basic architecture of our Constitution. By the way, Joe Biden has nominated her to be an Article 3 judge. Article 3 is right after Article 2. It creates the federal judiciary. I assume she doesn't know what that is either. I would note that the chairman, in defending her, suggested, well, gosh, there may be some members of our committee that don't know what Article 2 is. I feel confident that's not true, but if there is on either side of the aisle, you should stand up and resign the committee right now. To give you a sense of how unqualified this nominee is, she listed in her judiciary questionnaire her top 10 litigated cases. And I just want you to pause and read this for a second. Her top 10, she did a driver's license revocation. She did a second driver's license revocation. She did an unemployment benefits appeal. She did another unemployment benefits case. She did another unemployment benefit case. And her sixth case was an unemployment benefits case where on the opposing side was a pro se litigant. In other words, this poor fellow didn't have a lawyer. And you know what? The pro se litigant beat her. She lost to a pro se litigant. What's her seventh most consequential case? I'm sorry, there isn't one. There's not an eighth, there's not a ninth, there's not a 10th. She's argued over a couple of driver's licenses, and the Biden White House says you should be a federal judge, an Article III judge, not that you have any idea what in the hell that is. In this administration, if you are a left-wing radical, it doesn't matter if you're competent. In Washington state, is there not a single competent lawyer who is competent to be a judge? And by the way, for all the Democrats, since Joe Biden has become president, every one of you has rubber-stamped every single nominee. Is there not a one of you that is willing to say enough is enough? When Donald Trump was president on the Republican side, we confirmed some fantastic judges, but there were several we sent back that we said, no, you missed it on this one. There's not even one Democrat willing to say enough is enough. And by the way, she's not the only one. Another one being considered, a nominee, Cruz. Thankfully not spelled C-R-U-Z, spelled C-R-E-W-S. When asked about Brady versus Maryland, one of the foundational criminal law classes, again, first-year criminal law, you learn about Brady. She said, I'm sorry, I don't know what Brady is. That'll be a problem if she's ever presiding over a criminal case. There are a number of members of this committee who have tried criminal cases. Do you know what Brady is? Of course you do. Because if you're remotely competent, you know what it is, not this judge. Look, sadly, the standard for nominees now seems to be licensed attorneys in Washington. Have you ever handled a criminal case? You ever tried a jury trial? Have you ever stepped foot in federal court? Well, then please contact Senate Democrats because you too can be a federal judge. I want to end with one more nominee that we're getting ready to ram through on party line votes. That is Judge Marian Gaston, nominated for a seat in San Diego. Judge Gaston, look, we've seen some radicals. We had a nominee earlier that this committee rubber stamped who said he woke up every morning motivated by his hatred for conservatives. Senate Democrats says, sounds like a judge to me. But let's see just how moonbat crazy we're willing to put on the bench. Here's a quote from Judge Gaston. Children are not safer because registered sex offenders are prohibited from residing near schools, parks, daycare centers, and other places where children tend to gather. And in fact, Judge Gaston continued, let's go to the next one. Judge Gaston continued, the conclusions and recommendations are that, difficult as it might be, so at least Judge Gaston recognizes this is pretty wingnut, the conclusion, laws that regulate where sex offenders may not live should be repealed or substantially modified in the interest of public safety. So I want you to understand the Joe Biden White House is saying a radical who wants sex offenders, who wants pedophiles to be able to live next door to daycares. That's who should be a federal judge. Look, some of y'all here represent blue states. Many of y'all represent blue states. I guarantee you in any one of your states. You go to Vermont, ask the people of Vermont, hey, what do you think about having a pedophile live next door to an elementary school, to a kindergarten, to a daycare? They'd look at you and say, are you out of your mind? That's who the Biden White House has given you. Now, I genuinely don't understand why Senate Democrats on this committee don't have enough respect for the constitutional role of the Senate to exercise some check and balance on the White House. I don't think they'll make you hand in your card-carrying Democrat cards to say, gosh darn it, we ought to have a judge who knows what the heck he's doing. John Kennedy has left bloody carcasses in this hearing from Trump nominees who didn't have sufficient experience to do the job. I ask my colleagues, if you vote for these nominees, you're going to have to defend them to your constituents. You're going to have to explain why a lawyer who handled a couple of driver's license revocations and doesn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution is should be a federal judge in charge of your life, your rights, and the law. And you're going to have to explain why you think it's a great idea that sex offenders and pedophiles should live next door to daycare centers. I think that's nuts. And I think most of our constituents do too.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
All right, we have seen the whole thing. Here is my honest take. I am not here as a Cruz fan. I am not here for any party. I am here because what was just shown on that Senate floor should bother all of us, regardless of how we vote. So let's start with Charnel Beckelgren. Cruz called her possibly the least qualified nominee he has seen in 11 years on that committee. And looking at what he actually presented, it is hard to argue. Senator Kennedy asked her about Article 2 of the Constitution, the part that creates the presidency and the executive branch, and she said she did not know. This is a woman being put forward as a federal judge. An Article 3 judge. Cruz's point that Article 3 comes right after Article 2 in the very document she would be sworn to uphold? That one landed. Then he went through her case history. Her top 10 most significant cases, the ones she personally chose to highlight on her judiciary questionnaire, were mostly driver's license revocations and unemployment benefit appeals. She did not even have a seventh case to list. And somewhere in that record, she lost a case to someone who did not have a lawyer. A pro-SE litigant beat her. I want to be fair here. Not every great judge comes from a big firm. But knowing what Article 2 is, that is the minimum bar. It is not a high bar. She did not clear it. Then there is Cato Cruz. Brady versus Maryland is not a niche case. It is the foundational case on prosecutorial disclosure in criminal law. If you are going to preside over criminal trials, Brady is not optional. It is the floor. She did not know what it was. Cruz's point that the new standard seems to be, have a law license and you're in, is a stinging line. But based on what was presented, it is not an unfair one. The moment that cuts deepest, though, is Marion Gaston. Policy debates are complicated, and reasonable people disagree on a lot. But Gaston's documented position that residency restrictions for registered sex offenders near schools, parks, and daycare centers should be repealed is not a nuanced policy disagreement. Cruz's point is simple. Go to any state, blue or red, and ask ordinary people what they think about that. You already know the answer. And that is what makes this speech work. Cruz is not just making partisan noise. Every single thing he cited is public record. Questionnaire answers, hearing transcripts, published written positions. You can go check it all yourself. What keeps coming back to me is his challenge to his Democratic colleagues. The advise and consent role of the Senate exists for a reason. It is a check on executive power. If you rubber stamp every name the White House sends over without independent judgment, you are not doing your job. He pointed out that Republicans pushed back on some of Trump's own nominees when they were not up to standard. He is asking where that same accountability is on the other side. And I think that question is the one that lingers longest after this video. These are lifetime appointments. These judges do not face re-election. They can sit on the bench for decades. The decisions they make affect real people and real lives. That is not something to wave through on a party line vote without serious scrutiny. You do not have to agree with Ted Cruz on everything. I certainly don't. But on this specific issue, on this specific day, He was asking the right questions. And the silence from the other side spoke for itself. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think judicial nominees are being held to a high enough standard? I want to hear where you land on this. And if you are new here, subscribe. This is what we do. See you in the next one.